My name's Dayton. I'm from Voxter. We are a Kazoo integrator, an ITSP, a bunch of things. We are primarily located in Canada, in Vancouver, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about specifically deploying Kazoo globally, but how we do it, and then some of the things we've built, and some of the things we want to contribute, and some of the things we want to encourage everybody else to get involved in. So a little bit of an overview. I'm just going to kind of highlight on a couple things here, and then we'll have a demo at the end, and the demo is thankfully not a real-time SIP thing, so hopefully it will work. So yeah, like I said, we've been around since 2005. We've been doing this for a long time. Like probably most of you, we started on Asterisk. We've still got a number of Asterisk deployments out there. We're migrating them to Kazoo. There are certain things that we can't yet do on Kazoo that we could do on Asterisk, or we could do easier on Asterisk that our clients still depend on. So it's a bit of a process. We're building some of the software necessary to get us from A to B along the way. And yeah, we've been using Kazoo for about 3 years, I think. I'm probably the worst person in the world with time estimates, as everybody at my company will tell you. Very similar to Darren by the sounds of it. We originally built a similar stack to Kazoo using OpenSIPs, FreeSwitch, Postgres instead of BigCouch, no RabbitMQ. And a bunch of applications written in a bunch of different languages. So when we found Kazoo, at first, I think it was Darren that gave the speech saying that Kazoo had been built and everybody was welcome to come and play with the APIs and see what it was all about and have it do cool things for you. But without a GUI, a lot of people kind of just looked at it and said, well, I don't know how to make it do anything. So, and that was actually us as well, because we didn't, honestly, the problem is when you go and you look at a big project like this, you're not really kind of, you're not entirely sure the scope, right? So, without being able to see a visual representation of what it is that it's going to do for you, when you hit the GitHub page or whatever it is, whatever it was at the time, you know, it just looks kind of daunting, right? So the GUI shows up. Anyways, when we got to this point, we eventually realized what it was. We ditched a lot of the original architecture that we had built. And we kept a lot of the pieces that we had built along the way. One of those things was a management interface, and kind of swapped out our engine for Kazoo, if you will. It's been great. So we sell hosted PBX to business, and we also help integrators in other technology companies like MSPs or interconnects or you know, IT people in general sell VoIP without as much derpery. And if anybody here has ever dealt with a reseller who has been left to their own will to figure out what to do, like the previous gentleman said, or a couple gentlemen ago, if you give a customer, they will stab themselves in the eye with a fork and then call saying that they can't see anything. That does happen. So, you know, kind of helping people through that process is and that process is technical. That process is around business decisions, marketing decisions, pricing decisions. It's challenging. So yeah, like I said, we built a custom GUI. We have a number of third-party integrations. We integrate with people like Dyn and NS1, FreshBooks, Beanstream, Salesforce.com, Sugar CRM. So you can see from this, like we integrate with Dyn and NS1 for DNS, of course, with FreshBooks and Beanstream for invoicing and payments, Salesforce and Sugar for things like CRM integration and screen pop and number routing with things like Pivot. The GUI specifically was built around managing reseller level accounts, so hopping in and out of a lot of accounts rapidly. Things like when you create an account, it goes and creates DNS for you, that sort of stuff. And we built a network-wide DID manager. I don't know if this has changed now or if it's on the roadmap to be changed, but at the time anyway, going and trying to see a list of all of the phone numbers in the entire cluster was retrieve a list of the accounts, spider the list of the accounts, return a list of the phone numbers on all those accounts. And as you can imagine, that's a very taxing process if you've got thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of phone numbers. And we built a WebRTC phone into it. I'm not going to give you a live demo of it because that would be asking for it to crash, but I'll give you a couple screenshots. So, for instance, this is our DID manager. We can see what carrier it belongs to, edit E911 info, see which account it is, which reseller it belongs to, whether it's available to be provisioned, that sort of stuff. We also added in a whole bunch of macro-based actions, things like add an extension. This was before Monster was out, obviously, because it's out yesterday. And we've been working on this for a while. So this thing would go in and it would create a user and a device and a call flow and a voicemail box and do all those things. We actually also built a provisioner. Go figure. A lot of people built provisioners. Specifically, we built a provisioner to deal with Astra phones, where you don't have to put in the MAC address of the phone. They boot up and talk to Crossbar and authenticate themselves so that the user only has to enter their extension number and their voicemail box PIN on the screen of the phone to log in. We're trying to get Polycom support in there too now that they have an API to do that sort of stuff, but it's not done. And like I said, we built a WebRTC phone in that does video and stuff. This has actually been more helpful than anything to just test. You set up an account, you set up caller ID for a customer. You want to make sure that their outgoing caller ID is right. You don't want to have to go on site to do that. You could become their device, register, make a call, see if it works. Kind of handy. So where we exist. So I've been talking about how we deploy globally. So we have international POPs. We are in Vancouver. We are in San Jose, close by. We're in Toronto, Miami, Dominica, London, and soon to be Tokyo. I'm just noticing that my PowerPoint did go back a revision because there was a modification to this slide. But nonetheless, so we have to take into account a whole bunch of things about how we deploy. We do, I verified, use federation. We do use zones. Each one of these data centers has a Kazoo cluster in it, and they are all aware of one another. We can go through any one of those POPs and have phones registered to them, and you can have 40 phones for a customer online in San Jose, and they could have an office of 20 in London, and those people could be on the London POP. It will federate those events. The only thing that I'm actually sure of that, and I'll say this saying that I haven't updated even to 3.12 yet. This cluster is running 3.08. But the only thing that did not work on that cluster with federation was ACDC. When you have agents joined from multiple zones. That was the only thing that didn't work. It might work now. It might not work now. I'm not sure. So yeah, there's a lot that we had to learn along the way. A lot of this is really difficult to do when you assume that you don't have the concept of a local zone to you anymore. I mean, for instance, we're in San Francisco right now. You might have a San Francisco POP. That POP might serve customers in the California area. Local to you, so you don't really need to worry about things like, different time zones. You might not need to worry about things like local calling areas for your customers. But for us, we have to worry about these things. We have customers, like I said, in London. They expect that a call to London will be free, potentially, to the surrounding area. But so do our customers in Toronto, and so do our customers in Vancouver. And if you just used one database with one set of rules and one set of configs, that wouldn't be true for everybody. I mean, everybody would, you'd have to start excluding and saying, okay, well, we can't really track that for you, so I guess everybody gets free calls. That sucks, you lose money. So architecture is challenging. Routing is challenging. We operate our own networks, so that's been at least a little bit easier for us. Internationalization issues. I know that Telephonic is working on sponsoring, or has finished, or is in the process of sponsoring getting international support for multiple languages into Kazoo, not only into the GUI, but into the audio prompts. That's awesome. Timestamps. Setting all of your servers to UTC is an absolute must. You can't have events happen in your cluster in the UK that are happening before or after the time zone of the other members, because then logs don't make any sense at all. Tone zones, for instance, or phone numbering. If we deploy phones to Japan or phones to the UK or phones to the Netherlands, we need to take into account what are their local tone zones on the phones, like the tone sets, the audio waveforms that you hear when you hear a dial tone or you hear ringing or a busy signal. If we start playing North American tones to people, they're picking up the phone, and this has happened, so this is why I'm using it as an example. I don't understand the tone I'm hearing. What do you mean you don't understand? Oh, right. Your tones are different. And of course, the business logic behind it. Like I said, rating calls. What is your pricing? What is acceptable? In a lot of areas, there is no concept of free local calling. Everything's per minute. So having to deal with the business logic around how you sell that when you operate networks all over the place can be challenging. Luckily, there are a number of provisions in Kazoo and in Couch specifically to be able to determine how different zones behave. Like I said, in terms of availability, using zones, using federation, an absolute must unless you don't actually want to operate a global network and you want to operate a bunch of islands. We heavily rely on the zone configs in Big Couch, the zone configs in Kazoo or the Kazoo config.ini. We heavily rely on DNS, specifically DNS SRV. Backups cross sites, replication cross sites. It's an interesting problem to solve, and you really have to be aware of what you're doing. And if you make an incorrect design decision, it might not necessarily break, but it might have an unforeseen impact on what happens, right? For instance, in Big Couch, if you only have 2 database nodes in your cluster, let's say we've got a cluster in San Francisco, and every one of your clusters has 2 database nodes. If you set your read or write quorum to 3, when you initialize your databases, 1 call is going somewhere to another cluster before you get, quorum back. And that could be damaging. It can take a long time. It could lead to timeouts. It could lead to a whole host of strange problems. So you really have to be aware of that stuff. Then on the operations side, monitoring across all these platforms, and this is something I'm going to give a demo on today. Alerting, logging, scaling, and by scaling all I really mean is interpreting this data and determining when it's time to scale, or when it's time to stop virtualizing, or when it's time to add another database node or another free switch node. And then managing this globally through SUP, through the APIs, through the GUIs. This is stuff I'll take you guys through. So again, on internationalization, we have to worry about things like E911. There's regulation there. There's interesting rules, actually. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. In particular countries, to buy a DID or to own a DID, you think, well, I'm a carrier. I should just be able to go and buy a block and then keep them in reserve and sell them. Like, this is how it works here. If you try to buy a DID in Amsterdam, they go, okay, well, we'll give you that, but I want to see a copy of your ID, and I want to see a copy of your business license, and a utility bill that proves that you have an address in that neighborhood that you've requested that DID. And you're like, that's crazy. To be able to keep stock on these things is really difficult. So there are carriers out there that can help you get around this, but they charge you an arm and a leg. Like I said, I went through time zones, tone zones. Provisioner is an interesting application of figuring out how to apply the right time zone or the right tone zone or the right language to the devices that you've got deployed. And luckily, we've got this sort of information in Kazoo and in Couch per account based on the time zone that we specify. So we can kind of extract some information out of that time zone and figure out what to apply, or we can apply particular rules based on which cluster you've connected to. Routing inside of an international Kazoo cluster may not behave as you would initially expect. And then as soon as you are told how it behaves, then it makes perfect sense. I'm going to give you an example. So we have, like I said, clusters in Vancouver and San Jose. So if we had, on one of our inbound carriers, we had a DID, and we had it pointed to Vancouver. And it reaches our Vancouver SBC, it reaches Camelio, and all of the phones in the account that it's calling are actually registered to the San Jose cluster. And we can see that because we can look in the Camelio registrar table and we can see that they're attached to that SBC. What does not happen is the call is not automatically re-invited to the other cluster because all the phones are there. It actually is locally served on that SBC, and that SBC will call across maybe the internet to those endpoints, and that may be what you want, maybe in a failover scenario, but it's probably not what you want consistently, because that kind of defeats the point of having local presence. And in our case, at least, we worry a lot about local presence. We run our own data center, we run our own IP layer. We do last mile connectivity. In a lot of cases, we actually run last mile connectivity to a customer. So we really care about the path. We don't want it to route over public internet. So in these cases, you need to be careful. DNS SRV really helps, particularly for carriers. I mean, I can't stress enough, when you're picking an inbound carrier, picking a carrier that has not only support for DNS SRV, but a support for a primary and a failover route, hugely helpful. We utilize services from both Dyn and NS1 that allow us to do geo-aware DNS responses inside SRV records, which is kind of neat. So that really helps too. But I mean, it's something to know. You need to make sure that you're looking at the path of your traffic and you're routing things to the correct spot. Otherwise, you may get unexpected behavior, or potentially, at the very least, you might get some latency, you might get some packet loss, and you might not know why at first. So, of course, call rating and billing, invoicing, pricing, all of these have their own challenges when you're dealing in multiple layers. You've got to deal with currency, tax, like local calling areas, like I said. There are ways to get around this. In Kazoo, like I said, when you are taking the data out, be aware of the cluster that you're pulling it from. Take a look at the time zone on the account, and apply accordingly. Otherwise, it can, especially if you're all about automation, it can be challenging. So we were talking about zones and federation earlier. So Big Couch has zones. CouchDB, by the sounds of it, does not have zones any longer. Maybe somebody will add it back. I'm going to show you a quick snapshot of one of our two-zone configs in the next slide. And the reason I'm going to show you this is because I've personally seen on the mailing list, the 2600 Hertz users and dev mailing list, people asking often why sometimes their cluster goes bananas and they get RabbitMQ errors. And what they've said is they're running a rabbit, or pardon me, multiple rabbits in one zone. And so I'm going to show you what it should look like. Oh, one other thing before I go on to the next slide. Making sure that you run enough machines in one data center that you could have the rest of the world go away and that data center continues to work. Huge. Like I said, not having Big Couch have a write quorum of a number that exceeds the number of database nodes in your cluster. Otherwise, you will notice that it will give you data, but you can't, for instance, save voicemail attachments or upload media. And that sucks, because it's difficult to troubleshoot when you don't know that you've made the mistake. One last thing before the next slide. Couch is also very interesting in that it's revision-based, and you'd think, oh, great, revisions. That means I can delete something, and I can just roll back. No. You cannot delete a document or a database, particularly a database, and roll back. It's gone off the disk. So back those files up. or use that tool that recently showed up in the community scripts folder on GitHub, 2600's GitHub account, to be able to do database dumps so that you can do a restore. Try doing a restore. You might be surprised how it behaves. So not that this is anything to follow, but if anybody has looked at this file and anybody has tried to do federation, you will notice, I don't know if I have, this is what I was talking about. These are two AMQP RabbitMQs that are running in primary and secondary. The secondary line is not used unless the primary goes away. You should not put, I forget the way other people have been doing it, but it's one AMQP URI per, I guess it would be zone, but I'm not sure. Anyways, this is the way that we're running clusters. This is the way that you can have a primary and a backup RabbitMQ. And you can see eCall Manager, you can see the whistle apps, how you specify which zone they're a part of, how you tell them which hosts they are. Obviously, they need the Erlang cookie to work. But I'll move on. So the operation side of things. So we do a lot of work with Kazoo operationally, and this is around monitoring, alerting, deployment, logging, and managing it. So for instance, we have used a number of tools, some of which you can see up on the screen, like Diamond. Diamond, if you've never used it, is like StatsD or CollectD. It grabs system-level data and takes it and puts it through Graphite API, which is just a small little Graphite talker that doesn't require the entire Graphite suite, that then sticks that data into InfluxDB, which is time series database. We use Grafana to graph that, which I will be demoing to you in a moment. We get this data using SUP. We monitor our servers and our clusters with Sensu. We deploy all of this stuff with Puppet. And every time a machine comes online, we use DNS to determine what that machine's role is. We go from a Supermicro server arriving in our office to plugging it into an Ethernet port, having Pixie boot, do a CentOS kickstart. Then it reaches out to Puppet and says, hey, I'm here. Puppet goes, okay, you look like a FreeSwitch box because you were called fso1.locationname.something.com. So I'm going to give you FreeSwitch. I'm going to give you the proper firewall rules for FreeSwitch. I'm going to install proper authentication policies, the right operating system packages. I will install Sensu. You will register yourself with Sensu. And up here, this is an old version of the slide. I had written more Kazoo APIs, please, before I realized that there was an amazing new crossbar edition called Crossbar Sup that allows you to execute sup commands through Crossbar, which we hadn't been doing, and we were running them locally and pushing them to Graphite API. Now that'll be a lot easier. We log everything. On these boxes, they're all running our syslog. They go from our syslog directly over UDP. I suggest UDP, even though we might lose a log. Who cares? It's one log line. Don't use TCP. I mean, use TCP if you want, but know that if that connection hangs, so will everything on the box. That's bad. We've had Camelio hang a number of times because it's trying to log and getting no TCP response from a port, or maybe it's in connection wait, and all of a sudden registrations do this, and that's a bad day. That gets pumped to Logstash. Logstash, if you've never heard of it, and we will be contributing our Logstash parse code for Kazoo. It analyzes these log files, breaks them up into segments that it can understand and parse, spits them into Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is a Lucene data store that can search really fast on gigantic sets of data, and we use a front end called Kibana to search through it, display information about the machines, calls, what have you. I'll show you that in a moment as well. So, management tools. One of the things that we are contributing today, I don't know if anybody has ever used the sup tool. I don't know how many of you have ever sat there going, I don't remember the name of that module, and I really don't remember the name of the function I'm supposed to execute. Was it lookup number? Was it lookup numbers? How many arguments was it supposed to have? We wrote a little, very small actually, utility that goes in your bash completion.d directory in Etsy, and you have the ability to go sup, tab, 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 tab. Oh, look, those are all the modules. Tab, tab, tab. Oh, look, those are all the functions. Makes it a lot easier. We've made some patches to some WAPs. All right, applaud me. Yay! Applause. We've made some patches to some WAPs that I think a lot of people, if they've ever said, why doesn't Kazoo let me reboot a phone remotely? I could do this in asterisk in one command. Why? Now you can. I've given you the code. It's there. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the things that we're pushing into the 2600 Hertz community scripts GitHub. So, this is the wrong slide, but let me tell you about it. Okay, so we have done bash completion for sup, like I mentioned. We've added the support for checksync, which is a very simple SIP notify packet that gets constructed. You run sup, notify maintenance, checksync, realm, username. So if your realm is a.mycompany.com and the username is user_ABCDEFG, specify those. It will go and look up, where are you, phone? What registrar are you on? I'm going to tell one of the FreeSwitch servers to craft a packet and send it to you. It'll get that data from Camelio, and it will send a SIP packet off. The phone will honor you because it's coming from the media gateway that it's talked to already and it knows to talk to. And it will reach back to your central provisioning server, most likely do a check to see whether or not there are updates available. If there are, the phone will reboot. It will honor those updates. If you've told your phone, if your phone supports it, to reboot every time it gets a check sync. This is a very easy way to reboot a customer's phone without having to say, okay, we made the change. Could you reboot your phone for me? Yeah, that's actually, just unplug the cable. Plug it. Oh, now you broke it? Okay, great. Now I have to send the guy out. You won't have to do that anymore. You can send reboot command, and now because there is crossbar sup, you could do this over HTTP, which is even better. We made another 2 patches that we'll be contributing today. I don't know if they're already there. Like I said, we're submitting pull requests that we meant to do a long time ago. If you've ever used caller ID prepend, and you've tried to prepend a dash in the caller ID name, you'll notice that it gets stripped. Yeah, you could use dashes now. Yay. There's another patch that actually was discussed by Mikhail from SIP Labs. Interestingly, the point was just made, you guys have probably made a lot of the same patches. Like the community has probably made a lot of the same patches. We wrote a call flow module that allows you to arbitrarily set caller ID to whatever you want in a call flow, like a preset. You know, I would like to dial 9 and then a phone number and have it call out with our company's sales number or our company's support number. That's a module. That'll be there. I don't know if that's already there. I don't know if Mikhail's contributed it on his own, but that'll be there. What's that? Oh, awesome. Cool. I don't have to do a pull request for that. There was one other thing. There are 2 things. If you guys have ever tried to, you've sold a client, you're trying to figure out whether or not they've made their first call yet. Some of you have probably seen you can get first call emails. Client XYZ has just made their first call. They've just made their first registration. That's great. A sales team could use that and go, cool, I'm going to call them now and see how it's going. Occasionally, you might either miss that email, the email may not have been configured, maybe you didn't care at the time, and you want to query that client to see if that's happened yet. I couldn't find a way, anyways, to do that, so we wrote a little module that allows you to use sup or sup over crossbar to check an account ID and see if either the first call has happened or the first registration has happened. The final thing, I apologize that this isn't on our slides, was we were also perplexed by the fact that if you've ever been at the command line and looking in your logs, you have the account ID, but it is a long string of letters and numbers, and it doesn't really mean anything to you unless you've memorized all of your clients' account IDs, in which case, wow, you're weird. I hope you have 3 clients. There was no function to say, can I give you an ID and you can tell me what realm that is or what name that is? That's there. So, the next thing is I'm going to give you a quick demo of some of the stuff that we do with Logstash, with Kibana, with Grafana, which utilizes SNMP, and some of the data that I'm talking about with these WAPS patches to be able to return things like current registrations, active calls, and actually plot this data and use it. So let's see if I can get us over. So, super small screen. Sorry if this doesn't fit. Let me explain to you what we're looking at. This is Kibana. And I say Kibana with a pause because Kibana and Grafana look identical because one is a fork of the other. You'll see in a moment. What this is all of the data that has been pushed from all of our servers, and I've actually got just a small subset of data here so that I didn't end up overwhelming the demo. This events over time that you can see here is actually the number of events that Logstash interpreted. So right here, if we look at just this data, this is actually, you can see there's about 15,000 events, and then all of a sudden there was a gigantic spike to 30,000 events in that time period. You could use this to figure out, well, what is that? Was that a denial of service attack? Was that a registration attack? What was this? These are all the events that are coming from syslog in any way. Whether that's the data that you guys would be accustomed to seeing in the 2600 hertz platform.log, or your actual machine-level syslogs, Camellia logs. We've got filters for all of these things, and they'll be in the community scripts probably next week. If I scroll down here, I'm going to go down and show you some of the actual raw data. So we've got some columns here. I've just got some basic stuff turned on. Most of this is going to be Camellia logs. Some of you might recognize this. So we've got firewall logs here, Camellia logs. There's actually a couple more columns that, oh, here we go, got cut off my screen. So I can see what application did this come from. Or I could see, a particular call ID. I can actually click on that and say, what was all the data about this packet? What host did it come into? What time was it? What was the IP address of the endpoint? We do GeoIP on it so that we can tell where this device is, down to their Latin long. That's obviously not right. But I can see what host it was. I can see the actual the message. I can see what the syslog severity is, and I can decide to build dashboards or alerts, for that matter, on any of this data. I can actually also, just using this call ID, decide to, let's see if I can get this right. Let's go click on, where is the call ID? Right here. So if I click this little magnifying glass, it's going to change the entire query structure in the interface here. I'm just going to reduce this. And now all the data, I think I did it wrong, or my internet is down. Oh no, it's here. So it tells me, it's changed what I'm looking at now to be data just about that one call ID. So if someone in my support team says, hey, I just went and looked up a call ID, I don't know what's going on, but can you go in and look? You could now use a tool like this in your support, or you could give it to other people in your team, potentially, if you could teach them how to use the interface. At least you don't have to teach them how to use SSH or grep or read a log file and understand what any of those events mean. You can use Logstash to translate the verbiage used. So if if something's too complicated, you can rename it. I can see which applications are logging the most in this data set. So obviously Camellia is a gigantic contributor here. SBC02 in this Vancouver data center was the giant contributor. I can see which city, based on that GeoIP data, the majority of this data is about. That might be the most active accounts. I saw a script actually in the community scripts that goes through your 2600 Hertz log and tells you your most used accounts, most looked up documents, this sort of stuff. That's great for this sort of thing. Pushing that data into something like this, awesome, because it's fast. Certainly more fast when you're on, the local network. So that's just a quick demo of how you might use logs. Now, let me jump over real quick if I can get my browser tabs back. Whoa. Let's go over to Grafana. This might be a little bit more up your alley. So, this normally fits on one screen. I apologize that we're shrinking down to this here, but so I can see on our edge router in the Vancouver data center, this is live data for this data center, I can see how much traffic we're running on both of our edge gateways. I can see the total number of registrations live if I want. I could update this every second if I wanted to. I'm not going to because I know something will break. But I can also, and I'll show you in a minute, I can select a different time range. I can zoom in. And when I zoom in, the time range for every one of the graphs on the page changes. So if you see like, oh crap, there was a big spike here, and I want to zoom in on that, and I want that to change. I'm going to zoom in now. Whoops. I want that to change my view to see what happened and look up correlated events. You can. So here we go. This is obviously a whole bunch of phones, well, maybe a whole bunch, 30. So in the last, we must have had a big client come online today. This looks like about, maybe 25. 25 phones came online today, and they've been online. They didn't disappear. That's good. I can see the total number of active calls. Now, here's something interesting. You might say, I really want to know when I'm failed over to my backup proxy. Maybe I do great monitoring and I already know that. Maybe I don't. I'm going to scroll down and show you. Let's take a look at this series. In that data set, I can see on SBC01 or SBC02 how many registrations were on each. So clearly, some people's phones have decided that SBC02 is the reachable one. Maybe somebody hard-coded that and they need to be smacked. Maybe they were unable to do a DNS lookup on SBC01. I have no idea. But ultimately, I don't really want to see that. I want to see them all on one or all on the other. Maybe, depending on really what I'm going for. I can see I've got pretty even active call distribution between the two media gateways in this cluster. So there's a whole lot of information that you can glean. And so this data is all coming from SUP, actually. Actually, that's not entirely true. I lied. It is. This data is coming from SUP because I didn't know through Crossbar how to do a query of this data for the entire cluster, particularly because I didn't know that Crossbar SUP existed. And you could even use data like this. Let's see if I can actually tab switch using hotkeys. Yay! This is a client XYZ. This is real data, but I've obfuscated their name. They've got, we provide them a router. We provide them with dedicated connectivity. That's actually very important for us, like I was mentioning earlier. We do SNMP to their router. We determine what kind of bandwidth is that router running. That's a bad spike. That shouldn't have happened. I don't know what that is, but that's probably somebody who's plugged a computer into the voice network, and it's being allowed out to the internet, and I need to go and find that and stop it, because that's going to result in choppy audio, potentially, if their line is only 2.5 megabits. I can see the number of packets per second, error rates. I can see the number of online phones for this specific customer, for this realm. I can see the number of active calls for this customer, for this realm. And depending on what you care about, you might be able to use this to see all of your data centers, all of your clients. You could give this to your client and you could say, hey, you're a gigantic customer and you really need to know this sort of data. I can give this to you and you can have a heads up. Or what we do is we display this on a number of televisions in our office that have rotating screens that show us information about all the clusters, how many phones are online, and we actually alert on this data as well using Sensu. We pull data from Graphite If it goes above or below a threshold, or if it changes too much, we get an alert. So, a lot of this is doable in Kazoo today, but it's not been pre-packaged. I'm going to be posting to the community scripts. I tried submitting a pull request earlier, stupidly submitted a pull request for every single commit that I did, which is not what I wanted to do. So I will redo it, and you guys will have the bash completion stuff. You'll have the check sync stuff for rebooting phones. I'm going to submit all of our configs for how we did Logstash, how we set up Puppet, actually, how we set up Kibana, Graphite API, all this stuff, so that you guys could go in and see the queries that we're using to get this kind of data out and build a dashboard on your own if you like. There is one more thing I wanted to mention, and let me see if this is, yes, this is what I wanted. So, this last thing, I'm not even going to bother. I'll bother. Why not? So, I wanted to talk about a couple things that we're building, and particularly around the conversation that happened with the community interaction, the community projects, or I don't know if bounties would be the right word, that 2600 Hertz is setting up to try and encourage community members to participate and help each other build tools. I really just crashed PowerPoint again. I'm just going to tell you. So we're building a couple things. Right now, we just started work on, if any of you have deployed Asterisk before, and you've deployed tools that exist in the third-party world, things like Flash Operator Panel, iSymphony, Astronet QStats, anything that uses Asterisk Manager interface, you know that coming to Kazoo, there's a gap. Because you either need to have those applications be able to talk to that and still function, that does not exist today, or you need to rewrite that entire application. And obviously, nobody has the time because those applications would have been written already. Or maybe you guys are working on them and you're not telling anybody. So tell people. But we are working on an AMI, the Asterisk Manager Interface, translator proxy to Kazoo. This is something that we're going to put on GitHub, and we're going to be sponsoring it. We're paying right now a single developer to work on this project. He's a consultant, but the intention is we're going to participate in this publicly because everybody's going to have different cases for this, and it's not a one-to-one. You can't just say, oh, well, we'll just translate AMI to ESL, the FreeSwitch event socket, because it doesn't really work that way. Kazoo is a cluster. The clusters have zones. If you ask a FreeSwitch server directly, it might not even know what you're talking about. So we need to bridge to both FreeSwitch and Crossbar and maybe even RabbitMQ. And so we're going to start on this work, and we want to try to get as many people as we can. If you've ever needed one of those tools, Flash Operator Panel, iSymphony, whatever, if you want to be able to use those and point them at something that will talk to Kazoo, we're starting on this project. I want to get as many people participating and contributing as possible. I guess keep an eye out on whatever becomes the place to have this community partner discussion. This will probably come in the next couple weeks, or I'll make a post on the Google Groups users and dev list. Please participate. The other thing is, and I saw this mentioned by Mikhail, a CNAM lookup tool and what I would maybe call an on-net, off-net lookup tool. I had this idea that I talked about at KazooCon last year of if it would be possible, and I think it would be great actually, for everybody that operates, particularly a Kazoo cluster, but really any edge proxy that speaks ZIP when you're an ITSP, to be able to send out a request similar to CNAM, but less I want your caller ID and more I want to actually figure out the best way to route to you. And I want to know if I could send out a request for an off-net number that's being dialed to know whether or not I could I could send this call directly to you instead of to my PSTN provider. This has been attempted before, but I think it can be done better. Sorry? Yeah, Dundee's done it. I think the enum people do it, or inum people do it, where they advertise a SIP route back. The problem with that is, I mean, yeah, that works. That's okay. But I don't necessarily want just a SIP URI, because then I have to take whatever path that I take to get from me to you, and that's the Wild West. I don't know where it's going. So being able to return additional data, things like this is my direct customer and I am responsible for them, having the notion of, you know, seeing Newstar go away, that would be awesome. Not paying PSTN providers would be awesome. So I don't know how this is going to look. I don't know how it would, you know, even work yet. But I'm telling people because I really want to get the concept of this out there, so that when it becomes available, having something that we could put in the Kazoo App Store that says, I would like to participate in the Kazoo Global Routing Network directory, and anytime one of my customers calls one of James' customers, I don't need to know that. A request goes out, James' cluster goes, yeah, that's my customer, you can route to me. I mean, there's privacy issues, there's security issues. It's a big problem. But we're going to start tackling it, and I really love KazooCon, and I really love talking to everybody here, and I'm sure everybody else has the same experience, because we all realize that we're all working on a lot of the same stuff. And I think with this new community program that 2600Hz is doing, it'll really foster us to work together on stuff that maybe 2600Hz doesn't have any interest in, or maybe they're too busy. Maybe it's on the roadmap, maybe it's not. But let's all work together. We're fighting the ILEX and the CLEX, really. We're not fighting each other. I'm pretty sure none of us have really run into to each other in trying to win business or losing customers. So, you know, the more we progress, the more we can work on cool value-add stuff that gives us a competitive advantage. That is my speech. Thank you.